Snow fell like whispers from heaven that early evening, blanketing the world in silver silence. The town of Willow Creek lay still beneath the fading daylight, each house glowing softly with warmth and laughter. But out on the lonely stretch of County Road 12, a man named Richard Cole was fighting tears as his old pickup rattled through the cold. The heater barely worked, and the engine coughed like it might give out at any moment. It was Christmas Eve, but for Richard, there was no joy left in the season. His wife had passed 2 years ago, and ever since then, every twinkling light only reminded him of what he'd lost. He was a single father now, raising his 6-year-old daughter, Maya, on a mechanic's paycheck that barely covered rent. As snowflakes drifted through his cracked windshield, Richard muttered a quiet prayer that he'd make it home before the evening grew darker. He had just finished his shift at the garage and wanted nothing more than to tuck Maya into bed and pretend, just for a moment, that everything was okay. But fate had other plans that evening, plans that would test his heart, his courage, and the very meaning of Christmas itself. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, miracles, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Bright Hearts. It truly helps us spread stories that warm the soul and remind the world that goodness still exists. That Richard's headlights sliced through the dusky air, reflecting off the snow like shards of glass. That's when he saw it, a small bundle lying on the side of the road, half covered in white. At first, he thought it was a pile of rags someone had dropped, but as he slowed down and leaned forward, his heart stopped. Something moved. He slammed the brakes, the truck skidding slightly before coming to a halt. Jumping out, the crisp winter wind slapped his face as he ran toward the bundle. Kneeling in the snow, his breath caught in his throat. It was a baby, no older than a few weeks, wrapped in a thin blanket, trembling and crying softly, its tiny hands clenched against the freezing air. Richard's heart pounded as panic surged through him. "Oh God, no," he whispered. Without thinking, he scooped the child into his arms, holding it close to his chest. The baby's skin was ice cold. He looked around. No cars, no lights, just endless snow and silence. Whoever left this baby here was long gone. Richard rushed back to his truck, cradling the child tightly. He turned up the heater as high as it would go and wrapped his coat around the baby. "Hang in there, little one," he murmured, his voice trembling. He looked at the baby's tiny face, pale but alive, and something deep inside him shifted. That same ache he'd carried since his wife's death was now mixed with fierce protectiveness. He knew he had to get help. The nearest hospital was 20 miles away, and the evening light was fading fast. As he drove through the snow, every second felt like a battle. The wind howled, the road shimmered under the last golden streaks of sunlight, and his headlights flickered. But he didn't stop. "You're not dying tonight," he said under his breath. "Not on Christmas Eve." By the time he reached St. Mary's Hospital, the sky had dimmed to a soft indigo, the last traces of sunlight glinting off the snow. His hands were shaking so badly, he could barely carry the baby inside. Nurses rushed to meet him, their voices filled with urgency as they took the child. Richard stood there, his boots dripping melted snow, his breath ragged, watching them disappear down the hallway. Hours later, after what felt like forever, a nurse approached him with a tired smile. "You did the right thing, sir. The baby's stable now. You saved its life." Those words hit him harder than he expected. He sat down in the cold hospital chair, the weight of everything catching up to him. When the nurse asked for his name and address, he told her everything: the road, the snow, the blanket. She thanked him and promised the police would handle the rest. But as Richard turned to leave, something inside him hesitated. He glanced toward the nursery window where the baby slept under a soft glow, peaceful now. He didn't know why, but he felt an unexplainable pull, as if fate had placed that child in his path for a reason. Back home, Maya ran into his arms as soon as he walked through the door. "Daddy, you're late," she giggled, then frowned when she saw his red eyes. Richard forced a smile and tucked her into bed. That evening, while she slept, he couldn't shake the image of the baby's tiny face. He sat by the window, the last light of dusk fading outside, wondering who could abandon something so pure. Days passed. The story of the Christmas Eve miracle baby spread through the town. People praised the mystery man who had found and saved the child, though few knew it was Richard. Local news outlets covered it, calling it a miracle that the baby had survived the freezing evening. Police said they hadn't found the mother yet, but they were investigating. Richard visited the hospital again, telling himself he was just checking in. But when he saw the baby again, awake this time, staring at him with wide, curious eyes, something inside him broke. He talked with the nurse, who told him the baby still hadn't been claimed and would likely be transferred to foster care soon. The thought of that small, innocent life being passed from stranger to stranger tore at him. He knew it sounded crazy. He was barely keeping his own life together. The bills were piling up, and some nights he didn't even eat so Maya could have enough. But as he looked down at the baby's fragile smile, he couldn't walk away. He didn't know how, but he felt this was his second chance, not just to help the baby, but to heal his own broken heart. That night, Richard prayed like he hadn't in years. "If this is what you want, God, show me how," he whispered. The next morning, with the sun shining weakly through gray clouds, he called the hospital and asked about adoption procedures. The social worker on the other end hesitated, surprised, but agreed to set up a meeting. Over the next few weeks, Richard filled out papers, went through interviews, and opened his small home to inspections. Some days, he thought about giving up. It was too much, and the odds were stacked against him. But then Maya would ask, "Daddy, will the baby be okay?" And he'd remember why he was fighting. Months later, just as spring began to melt the snow, Richard stood once again in St. Mary's Hospital. The social worker smiled as she handed him a file. "Congratulations, Mr. Cole. The adoption is approved." He could hardly breathe as the nurse brought out the baby, now healthy, bright-eyed, and full of life. Maya squealed with joy, hugging Richard's leg as he held the little boy in his arms. "What's his name, Daddy?" she asked. Richard looked down at the baby and smiled. "Gabriel," he said softly. "It means God is my strength." Life wasn't easy after that. There were sleepless nights, doctor visits, and moments when the bills seemed impossible. But somehow, love always found a way. The garage where Richard worked promoted him after hearing his story, and the community rallied to help. Neighbors dropped off clothes and toys, and one kind-hearted woman even started a donation fund for the family. That on Christmas Eve a year later, Richard stood outside with Maya and little Gabriel bundled in his arms. The early evening light glowed softly across the snow, just like the night they met. The lights from the nearby houses shimmered warm and golden, and for the first time in years, Richard felt peace. He had lost so much, but life had given him something unexpected, a new beginning that he whispered, "Thank you," to the fading light, holding both his children close. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Bright Hearts. Your support helps us keep telling stories that remind the world that even in our darkest hours, kindness can light the way.